Last night I went and watched Shelby Oaks in theaters, and for anyone unaware, Shelby Oaks is a new horror film directed and written by YouTuber and film critic Chris Stuckmann. I personally found Chris Stuckmann's videos on YouTube way back in 2013 and have been watching him since then, so I have been excited for this film. I also live in Northeast Ohio myself, and Chris also lives in Ohio. This film is completely shot in Ohio, takes place in Ohio, so that part of it I was excited for as well. And I want to preface this by saying I didn't go into the film expecting it to be the most amazing horror film of all time. I didn't walk into this because I'm a fan of Chris Stuckmann with super high expectations, but I also didn't walk into it with super low expectations thinking, oh, it's a YouTuber movie, it's not going to be good at all. I tried to level my expectations as much as possible while realizing that this is a film that was initially made off of a Kickstarter as an independent horror film and was then picked up at a film festival by Neon to be distributed wide in theaters. Now, for him to get that opportunity is amazing, and I hope that more smaller horror movies continue to get picked up by studios like Neon, A24, etc. And that's awesome that that happened, but I feel as if the weakest elements of the film are when it tries to be more than a small independent horror release. I want to first say again that someone being able to make a horror movie essentially on their own at first by doing a Kickstarter and just deciding they want to make a movie without breaking into that system is one of the best things about modern filmmaking. Everyone always talks about, oh, if you want to be a director, just go grab your phone and film a movie. And sometimes that can sound kind of cringe, but it's true. In today's age, we have the tools necessary to basically do whatever we want. Now, not all of us are going to make a film that's then going to be picked up by a studio and released wide into theaters. Not all of us have the following to make a Kickstarter and raise millions of dollars. However, it is true that any one of us, if we want to, could make a film. And seeing something like Shelby Oaks not only be made but then distributed wide in theaters, regardless of how much you like the film, is a reminder of that, and honestly an inspiration for me as someone who has thought about being involved in filmmaking on a small scale in some ways. Hey, this is a realistic thing that you can do. And you don't have to be a Nepo baby or born inside the system or work your way up through the years in LA to finally be able to get someone to look at a script somewhere. You could just go out and do it, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult and you're still going to have challenges, but you can do it. And I think that that inspiration is awesome to see. So let's jump into the actual film. My favorite thing about the film is absolutely the performance of the main protagonist, Camille Sullivan, who plays Mia. I have never seen her, I don't think, in anything else, but I thought her performance was excellent, and for a good chunk of the movie, she was actually elevating the material that she was working with. I thought that for a film that's focused on a small amount of characters and for her to be absolutely the main character that takes up a lot of time, the casting was great because she did a great job. Best part of the film, in my opinion. I also respected that mostly the film avoids a lot of typical horror traps. There's not a whole bunch of false jump scares, loud noises for the sake of it. It doesn't fall into those complaints that you would see someone like Chris Stuckmann talk about all the time in his reviews, which makes sense. Why would he then put them in his movie? So I'm glad that it does mostly avoid those things. There are definitely jump scares once in a while that feel a little unearned, or noises that are thrown into the movie that feel like, hey, we want you to jump, so here's a noise. But it's within the realm that you would see in almost any horror movie. Almost any horror movie is going to have jump scares, going to have loud noises with those jump scares. It has to be earned. That's the main thing. I would say 90% of the ones in this film felt earned. There were only just a couple that I felt were cheap or unnecessary. So at the end of the day, it's not that big of an issue. I'm glad that it was a horror film that you can tell is made by someone who watches a lot and appreciates horror and has a lot of pet peeves with horror films, as I do. I was overall pretty impressed with the direction for a first film. I thought it looked great, very cinematic, and the found footage element as well was done very creatively and not cheaply. I hate when found footage tries to be found footage but doesn't make any sense in the way it's done. That's not the case here. All the found footage here looks like it's someone recording with a camera whenever they employ that. And then the actual cinematic part of the film I think was shot well too. The cinematography was done by Andrew Scott Baird. I thought he did a great job working with Chris on how the film looks. But in terms of the script of this movie, which is also done by Chris Stuckmann, the story by him and Samantha Elizabeth, I thought maybe needed to be written by somebody else. Now, it's his movie. He's going to write it and direct it, and that's awesome. One thing that I really enjoyed about the film was the idea of what's actually going on. And I don't want to get into spoilers, but going into the film, I thought I had an idea of what it would be and what it would be about, and I was surprised. The story did not go in the way that I would have expected. I would not say that the story is predictable. However, the way that it does go and the way that it plays out is where my issues with the story are that I can't really dive into without spoilers. But just in basic terms of, is this film predictable? Would I have guessed where it was going? No. And I applaud it for that. I was surprised, I was interested, and the paranormal aspects, I will say, to keep it vague, were all done well, and I thought were impressive visually, from an atmosphere standpoint, from a tone standpoint, and from an originality standpoint. Yes, there's obvious inspirations, but I thought it was done well enough to be its own story and its own film, and I liked that. Also, being an Ohioan, I don't know if this was at all done on purpose or if I'm thinking something's there that's not there, but there is a scene in the film that shows footage of somewhere in Ohio, and I'm pretty sure it's not the natural sound that's in the video. I think it's added in sound effects, but the birds in the background, the nature in the background, the sounds that they are playing is dead on Ohio. This film absolutely captures the atmosphere of Ohio, especially rural Ohio. And when I heard those bird noises in the background, I went, holy crap, I don't think I've ever heard those bird noises that I hear in my everyday life in a film. And that makes me think that they were specifically put in there because this was in Ohio. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm making that up, assuming something incorrectly. But I loved seeing that, and I loved how much I felt that the film represented that tone. But that brings to where the film really kind of falls short for me, is the story of this movie is both too basic and too focused for anything to really breathe. We spend the entire film following Mia trying to find her sister, and we never get to know the sister. We never really get to know Mia. We never really get to know about Shelby Oaks. We never really get to know about the paranormal paranoids. We never really get to know about Ohio. It is all just focused on this one small story of who took Riley. I need to find Riley. And once that story unfolds, there's absolutely interesting parts of that. But it's hard to care when big things happen in the film, when I don't have an attachment to Mia outside of Camille Sullivan's performance. I don't have an attachment to Riley. I don't have an attachment to this paranormal story. I live in Ohio, and in the film, I don't even really have an attachment to Ohio or Shelby Oaks. I appreciate that it's a short movie. As someone who is a huge fan of 90-minute horror films or shorter films in general, I feel way too many movies are way too stretched out in runtime. However, I did feel that this story needed more focus on making me care about these characters. The film is produced by Mike Flanagan, one of my favorite filmmakers, and what's so amazing about almost every single one of his films is that regardless of how much I care about the story or the paranormal horror stuff that's going on, I learn to love and care about every single one of his characters for the most part. Not all of his movies are perfect, obviously. And I'm a character guy. At the end of the day, I love horror movies, even if they're short and simple and campy, that's fine. But horror movies need characters, just like all movies need characters. And if you don't care about them, you don't care about the things that are going to happen to them. And I just found myself not caring about any of the characters in this film, which was disappointing. From the very beginning, just the way characters talk and the way that things are revealed in the film, it felt very much like the film just wanted me to know the information and wasn't very interested in revealing it to me in an interesting way. So I'm not going to be going into spoilers in this review, but the film opens up in a very kind of almost narration way where they do it in a way through news reports and documentary style to where the characters aren't talking to you directly as the audience in a narration way, but it might as well be. In the first whole chunk of the movie, while I appreciate found footage aspects of it, is very much, hey, here is all the information you need for this just about 90-minute movie, but we're going to take 15 minutes giving you all of that information up front. I'm not a big fan of that. My personal preference is to get the information revealed throughout the film, and it does do that with later information that's revealed, but all of the heavy setup way up front I felt was a bit much. I think it would have been a good idea to just throw us right into the found footage without explanation, without news footage recapping it or documentary-style interviews, to just have us watch the found footage. have us watch the Paranormal Paranoids for that first chunk of the film until its conclusion that sets up the main film, and then jump in there. Because I felt that would have been a way of getting us into the tone, into the atmosphere, but not having us just get info dumped right off the top of everything that's going on, which honestly, the information, it's not that complex. It's not that deep and layered of a story right up front that you need a 15-minute info dump. So it just felt a bit of an odd choice. And then throughout, there are scenes like a scene with Keith David, which is awesome to see in this film, where he just kind of is there for exposition and is there for a person that's just, hey, here is information that you need. And our main character literally writing down the information to then reference later. My last biggest gripe with this is that I feel as if someone like Chris Stuckmann should know that we as the audience should be trusted. When you tell us information, we will remember that, and we are smart enough to connect those dots. There are times in the film where Keith David says something, and then later on it's referenced, and they play Keith David's dialogue again over the scene, as if like just in case you forgot. And then it also happens at a very pivotal moment of the film where something big and important is happening, and they overlay dialogue that the main character said earlier just to like make sure you're aware of what's happening. I really didn't like that. For what it is, a 90-minute horror film that was originally supposed to be an independent horror film and then was picked up by a studio and released into theaters and made by a YouTuber who I've been following since 2013. I'm really happy that the movie was made. I'm happy I got to see it in a theater in a wide release and not have to watch it at home. And I hope that you guys do the same. Whether you're just horror fans or Chris Stuckmann fans or movie fans in general, I think seeing a movie like this that came out this weekend is going to be a lot better way to spend your money than going to watch something like The Black Phone 2, for example. No shade against that movie. I haven't seen it. But I feel like supporting films like this is what's going to get us more original films, whether you like individually those films or not, into theaters. And I hope that this movie does well because of that. Not only because I'm a fan of Chris Stuckmann, but because I'm a fan of smaller original films, whether in the horror genre or otherwise, getting released in the theaters, because that's something that we really don't get anymore. And this is a rare example of that. And yes, partly it is because of Chris's following and his YouTube that he's been able to build up over decades. But, you know, he's earned that. He built that, and he's earned that. While I did have a lot of problems with the film's story, I think directionally it was solid. I would love to watch Chris direct another horror movie. I would actually be very interested to see him direct a horror movie that's not his story at all, that's completely written by somebody else, and have him and his directional style come in to where he can focus on being the director of the film. I'd be very interested to see what that would be like for him. But whether that's the case or he writes and directs another one, I'll go see it either way. So I enjoyed the film overall. I had problems with it. I'm not going to do like a rating or anything, but if you're asking me if I recommend the film or not, yes, I do recommend going to the theater to see it. It's not going to take a lot of your time. It's a very short film, and if you're a fan of horror, I think you'll get enjoyment out of it, even though you might not be super in love with the story or care much about the characters. And Camille Sullivan's performance is good enough to recommend the movie on its own, to be honest. Alright, I know this isn't really a movie review channel, but this movie was something I was looking forward to for a long time, and I wanted to get my thoughts out there on it. So if you did watch, I appreciate it, and if you want more of these movie reviews like this from myself or Alex, leave a comment. Let us know what kind of movies you would like us to talk about. Doesn't have to be new releases, or it can be, whatever you guys would like. Let us know.